So combining a couple things that I've heard this morning, I'm thinking that maybe God is challenging me to step out of the boat on the water and come to the cooking event. That would be an act of faith beyond me. When I was a boy, this is about 6th grade or so, my family was living in Colorado. And in our neighborhood, we had some vacant lots. And every once in a while, somebody would buy the vacant lot and they would build a custom home on this vacant lot, which was thrilling to us. But when the lot was vacant, we played baseball on the lot. But when the big bulldozer came to excavate all the dirt in the middle of that property, they would make for the basement, they would put half of the dirt on the north side of the lot and the other half of the dirt on the south part of the lot. And we had this huge mountain north and south and this big valley in between. And for boys our age, that became dirt clod wars. And we would have 4 or 5 guys on the team, and we were hurling dirt clods at each other like it was a game, you know. But you hardly ever hit somebody. But when you did, you would hit them in the leg or the knee or the foot or the hand. And of course, we'd all just be roaring with laughter. Well, one day, we were playing dirt clod wars, and I hurled this dirt clod. And I still remember watching it go through the air, and I could see the line of it. And it was heading straight towards a fellow. I still remember his name, Emmett Harrison. One of the reasons I remember Emmett Harrison is because he was the biggest kid in the neighborhood. And I could see that this dirt clod had reached its zenith, and now it was heading down in a line for Emmett Smith. And it looked to me that if I had the right distance, and if Emmett didn't move, he was going to get clobbered with that dirt clod. He never saw it coming, and it landed right below his eye. Boom! And just sort of exploded, and he immediately fell to the ground on the northern mountain. We were on the southern mountain. Of course, when we saw him fall to the ground in agony, of course, the guys on our team were just laughing our heads off. This is just why we were here, to see something like this. Well, Emmett got up, and he was mad. I don't mean mad, I mean angry. And he had the look of revenge. And stupid me was over there celebrating, like here's this target. And remember I told you Emmett was the biggest kid in the neighborhood, and suddenly Emmett spotted me. And there was fury in his eyes, and he came roaring down the north mountain. And I remember him running across what was going to be the basement, and he started up towards me. And I told you that Emmett was the biggest kid in the neighborhood. I was the smallest kid in the neighborhood. And I remember thinking, this is not going like it normally does, and something needed to happen. And so thankfully, I did remember that though I was the smallest kid in the neighborhood, I was the fastest kid in the neighborhood. And about the time he got up almost to the top, I took off down the street. And if you had been watching this, you would have seen me looking over my shoulder. And because I was faster and I knew he couldn't catch me, taunting him and raising his fury all the more, I knew he couldn't chase me. He wasn't going to chase me down. Now, there's some parallels in the story we're going to look at today, and there's some contrasts with this story we're going to look at today. It's the story of David and Goliath. A number of years ago, Mindy and I got to go to Israel, and one of the places that we looked at was an overlook, looking over a valley with hills along one side and hills along the other side, where this particular event happened. And as we look at the story in 1 Samuel 17, the picture is the Philistine army along these hills on this side, and on this side, the Israelite army over here trying to defend its land from this invasion. And we stood there and like, wow, this is where this happened. And this David and Goliath story happens. Well, the Philistines had a strong army, but there was a standoff here, and neither army was willing to attack in the valley and then up the other side of the hill. But the Philistines really didn't have to worry about this because they had an ace in the hole. And this fellow's name was Goliath. We pick up the story, 1 Samuel 17, verse 4. A champion named Goliath. So the writer immediately identifies not just this creature, this giant Goliath, but that he was the champion of the Philistine army. Who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. Now, you have this picture, a bronze helmet, 9-foot guy, and the armor that's all down his chest and his back. It says 5,000 shekels. That's 78 pounds of armor that this guy's wearing. On his legs he wore bronze greaves. This meant that he was wearing boots, we would say, that are at least knee-high, made out of bronze. Nobody's going to take his feet out from under him. And a bronze javelin was slung on his back, was strapped to hold it in place. A spear shaft, which he held in his hand, was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels, which was about 9 pounds. Just the point of the spear, iron, was 9 pounds. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Now, I want to chase a rabbit before we get into the story here, because it's one of these stories that is just, it's the kind of story you find all through the Bible, and it's just one of those stories that you just shake your head and you say, you know, God, when you wrote the Bible, how did you do this? Through 40 different authors over the course of 1,500 years, all walks of life. It's just astounding, but this is one of those times. So you look at, we just heard about Goliath, 9 feet tall, and you wonder now, where did that guy come from? Now, if you look in your handout in Numbers 13:32, we are backing up about 430 years prior to David and Goliath. 4 centuries and a third. And the situation is Moses has the people of Israel up on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and they are about ready to invade the promised land and take it over. But just before they do, Moses says, you're going to take one guy from each of the 12 tribes. They get the spies together, go spy out the land, bring us back a report. The report comes back to the guys, Caleb and Joshua says, wow, God is in this, we need to go. That was the minority report. The majority report from 10 guys is, we are idiots if we go in there. They are going to decimate us. And you have here in Numbers 13:32 what these 10 did. They spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim, which goes back to Genesis chapter 6. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. The writer says, Moses says, we seem like grasshoppers in their eyes, and we looked the same to them. Now, the people took the majority report, and they said, we're not going in there. And they rebelled against Moses. They would not go, and Moses is kind of like, oh, not again. And so God tells the people, the nation, I am not about to let you go in there on this kind of unbelief. And so he says, make a U-turn. Back to Kadesh Barnea. You're going to take what we now refer to as the wilderness wanderings, which happened for 40 years. And God says to Moses, I am not letting any man 20 years old or older at this moment enter the land. We're going to wait 40 years. And every one of those 600,000 men and some change died except for 2 during that 40-year time, Joshua and Caleb. And they got to enter the land. Joshua was the leader. So that's about 40 years after we hear in Numbers 13. Then we go 40 years ahead to Joshua 11. So the people are across the Jordan River. There's a northern campaign, a southern campaign, a central campaign where they are taking the land. And about halfway through the book of Joshua, we have this report. Joshua 11:21. At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites, mentioned 40 years before by Moses in the book of Numbers, from the hill country. And then he mentions several towns that were going to be a part of the promised land, part of Israel. Hebron, Debir, and Anab, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of what would become Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them and their towns. No Anakites were left in Israelite territory. He said, well, how in the world, if that was true, how did any giant survive this? But then Joshua says, no Anakites were left in Israelite territory, only, and then he mentions 3 Philistine towns, Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Now, you fast forward almost 400 years, back to David and Goliath, and look at the verse we just read a minute ago from 1 Samuel 17. A champion named Goliath who was from Gath, one of those towns where the giants survived in Philistine territory. This is just one of those little delectable things. You think about about 430 years span of time, 3 different authors, Moses, Joshua, and Samuel. The leader, the general, and the priest. And here we have all these things that just line up over 400 years. Well, it's back to our story. So the crisis worsens. Every day, Goliath comes out from the Philistine army, and he taunts the Israelite army every day and challenges them. So we pick up his taunting. Verse 8. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, to all the army on this side of the hills. This is what he said. Why do you come out and line up for battle? And it's one of those rhetorical questions that really has the meaning of, you guys are a bunch of idiots. You haven't got a chance of surviving this battle. And he says, am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? Now, up until this time in history, there were many, many times in Hebrew history where whenever they went to battle, and if God was with them, they were the servants of God. And in a lot of cases, that spread terror in their opponents. And there are lots of places in the Old Testament where there's victories because of that. But notice that Goliath doesn't use the term servants of God. He says servants of Saul. If you remember last week, what we looked at was that King Saul thought that he knew better than God on several huge decisions and rebelled against what God wanted him to do and just determined to trust his own reason and his own, how the things seemed to him, his perspective of how things looked. Trust that. Why, surely God wouldn't want me to do that. And so Saul continued to persistently rebel on some really big things. And God said to him, in essence, if you want to go your way, you want to do things your way, go. My hands are off. And the idea is, I think about this, is good luck with that. And so what happens is Saul, you already begin to see some of the effects of this. His judgment is starting to wane. His age noticed something different. His courage is beginning to wane. He's more of a fearful person. His leadership is beginning to suffer. And the thing that I wonder about here, we're not told this, but I wonder if somehow the Philistines had gotten word of this. And where these words that Goliath says to all the army of Israel over here, you are just mere servants of Saul, would strike terror in those fellows. Choose a man and have him come down to me. And here the challenge begins. Verse 9, if he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. If I overcome him and kill him, you will become subjects and serve us. And so that the challenge is, we really don't need to do this massive battle here. You guys would get defeated. So let's do this. I'll fight anybody you choose. Bring them on out here. We'll do a one-on-one. Whoever wins, instead of this massive slaughter during the battle, whoever wins, the other side that loses becomes the slaves of the winners. That's the challenge. Now, if I am a soldier in the Israelite army, and I hear this challenge every day, this changes the landscape for me. Because up until this moment, what I've decided is I'm willing to fight for my country. I'm willing to stand with my people. I'm willing to go into battle and fight the Philistines, from taking over our land. And if I die during this, at least I die in a noble cause. But now suddenly it's different. Because what Goliath is proposing is that he, this massive 9-foot character with all these accoutrements, he would destroy any one of us in a one-on-one. And now it's not just going to affect me and my life, but my wife. And do I want my kids to grow up as slaves of the Philistines? And yet, we are paralyzed because it looks like a hopeless situation. Verse 10, the Philistine said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul, who's supposed to be the leader, and the king, and the man of courage, and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now, when I think about this story, there are many times where I think about that this story sometimes just mirrors life for me. I don't know if this is how this is for you. But there are many, many times in life where it's just much harder than you think it's going to be. And Satan, of course, is involved in this. In 1 Peter 5:8, be sober, be watchful. Your enemy, Satan, roars around like a prowling lion seeking someone to devour. And sometimes it seems like the challenges that you're up against are so daunting. You just don't know how any, like in this case with Goliath, you're certain there's no flesh and blood answer to this particular problem with Goliath. And when Satan takes us through some really, comes at us with some really big challenge, you think, I don't have what it takes to deal with this. Flesh and blood cannot handle this. And like the people here, King Saul and all the Israelites on the hills were terrified and dismayed. And sometimes fear just comes up inside of me and just seems like it just wants to grab hold of me and just paralyze me. And sometimes where Goliath says, we're going to take you all captive, make you slaves. Sometimes it seems like the ways of the world are so intoxicating, they come to tempt you, and sometimes you are so tempted just to go back to the old life you once knew and become a captive of sin again, slave of sin. And sometimes it seems like that if Goliath had his way with me, he would devour me in a second. And sometimes it seems like the things that we have to deal with in life would devour us. Sometimes that's how it seems to me. Well, David appears on the scene, and the way he appears on the scene is really interesting. How many of you have heard of Postmates? Some of you have an app on your phone, Postmates. Okay, a few of you. Okay, there's a company. Is this nationwide? Are they nationwide? Yeah. All right, there's this app. You can push this little button on your phone, and you can have food delivered wherever you are, from anywhere, almost anywhere. Is that kind of how that works? Okay, Postmates, pretty cool. And so you're just sitting there at home. You think, what are we going to have today? Let's have them bring it over. You don't have to leave the house. Well, Jesse, David's father, is back in Bethlehem, and David's 3 oldest brothers are in the Israelite army. And Jesse says, I got to get some food to these 3 older boys. It's been a while. And so he tasks David, and David becomes the first Postmate, maybe. He gets his food, puts it in his basket, and he takes it over to the Israelite army there. And as he's going there, he observes Goliath come out and taunt the Israelite army and challenge the Israelite army. And at the same time, so he's beginning to ask some questions from some of the soldiers. What is this all about? How can this be going on? This is horrendous. And at that moment, the oldest brother, of whom I am an oldest brother, hears this, and he is infuriated. And look what happens. 1 Samuel 17:28. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him. Now, why did he burn with anger at him? Well, last week we saw that Samuel went to Bethlehem to find the successor to King Saul. And the first person he met was Jesse. And it seemed like, wow, well, maybe this is it. Who's your oldest son? Eliab is the oldest son. And he stands before Eliab. And as he's standing there, God says to him, that's not the guy. Which would have been stunning if you're the oldest in the family, the oldest son, and you are not the king. So Samuel says, do you have any other boys? Well, there's 6 more right here. He says, bring them out. They go through 1 through 7. None of them are there. He said, do you have any other sons? Well, there's David. He's out in the pasture, but king, are you kidding? Go get him. So I wonder when Samuel anointed David is king, what happens in the heart of the oldest brother, Eliab? This should have been mine. I should have been king. What's wrong with Samuel and what's wrong with God? What's wrong with this whole process? Why wasn't I king? By the time David shows up on the scene, Eliab is a man who's filled with resentment and bitterness. He burned with anger. And he says to him, why have you come down here? This is not an information question. This is an accusation. And the accusation is such, you have no right to be here, and the only reason you're here, there must be something nefarious or self-centered. That's how it seemed to Eliab. And Eliab was wrong. Wrong number one. And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? Eliab assumed that David would have come for some nefarious, self-centered reason, and that he would have left the sheep all by themselves. What we know of David was he's one of the most responsible people all through the course of his life, a faithful man. Eliab sensed David messed up, and Eliab was wrong. Wrong number two. Next he says, I know how conceited you are, to his little brother. Now, truth be known, every older brother thinks his little brother is conceited. So I give a little bit of room here for Eliab, not much. But if you know the story of David, David is one of the most humble people around. Even though it seemed this way to Eliab, that David was conceited, Eliab was wrong. Wrong number three. And then he says, I know how wicked your heart is. Now, we saw last week the reason why David was chosen king by Saul was because he had a heart for God. And if you read the Psalms written through the course of David's adult life, you see this guy has a heart for God like nobody else. It seemed to Eliab like he had a wicked heart, and Eliab was wrong. Wrong number four. And then he says, you came down only to watch the battle. He questions his motivation. Self-centered. And we already know that he's the first Postmate guy. Going to build a company around David. He came because his father tasked him with giving food, providing food for Eliab. And sons number 2 and number 3. And though it seemed this way to Eliab, Eliab was wrong. Wrong number 5. Now, when I think about the story, if Eliab lived today, he would have a career in mainstream news journalism. Because in today's modern journalism and news, the all-important thing is to get the scoop before everybody else does. And so what you do is you go to government officials and you find the leakers who will give you the scoop. And once you get the scoop, well, you want to be the first one to report. And it doesn't matter if what the leak is true or biased. It doesn't matter if the leak can be corroborated or could be corroborated. That doesn't matter. Of course, you would never go to the person at whom this leak is going to incriminate. Why would you ever do that? Because what you want to do is be the first one to go live, reporting at the White House, reporting from Congress, reporting from the Supreme Court. Now, before I get too riled up about mainstream journalism, I did try to control myself when I was writing this, but apparently I didn't do that good a job. Before we get too much on Eliab and journalism, the Proverbs tells us that we as human beings love gossip. And it's like a morsel. We start to hear this and we can't wait to get the whole thing. I think this is like one of Janice's chocolate chip cookies. Just going to get that thing and right in my mouth. We just love to hear gossip. And then, without thinking about it, we draw the worst conclusions, or we assume the worst motives. However it seems to us must be true. But I wonder how often we're Eliab, gentlemen, with your wife. Or for you, wives, how often you are Eliab with your husband. Are you Eliab with your boss? With a coworker? With an in-law? Well, enough of this. David's confidence is the thing that strikes you the most about the story. It's what strikes me the most about the story. In spite of how dire this situation looked, David was the only one in the whole group on the Israelite side that had any confidence about this situation. And what we'll see is there are three things that give him confidence. Verse 32, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of the Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." I said, well, what in the world possessed David to volunteer for this assignment? Number one, verse 34. Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. Now, you may wonder, how did a young teenage boy kill a bear or a lion? And David says that's what he did. And he just told us how he did it right here. And if you know the story of David and Goliath, you're going to see how he did it. And he did it the same way he killed a bear and a lion. Now look back at this verse. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock. The picture is he's out there with a sheep. Suddenly a bear or a lion comes off to the edge of the sheep, off of the herd, and grabs a sheep and takes off, starts walking away with his kill, or what he hopes will be his lunch. David sees this, and he begins to follow the bear and the lion. And then he says, I went after it and struck it. Now, how did he strike it? Well, he struck it the same way he's going to strike Goliath, with a stone and a sling. A smooth stone. Now, this is not a sling, but it's as close as I could find and was willing to put time into. But a sling was that kind of thing like this, you know, with the stone in here. And David had learned, as we'll see in our story, pinpoint accuracy. Boom. Now, I don't know how heavy the stone is, but I think if I had thrown this at Emmett Harrison back in Colorado, Emmett would have died that day. He strikes the lion and the bear. The lion and the bear is incapacitated, just like Goliath is incapacitated. And then he says, and then I went and rescued the sheep from his mouth. So the lion and the bear, not yet dead, still on the ground, but immobile. He takes the sheep out of the mouth of the lion. And then he says, and when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair and struck it. And here he would have had probably not something as wondrous as this knife. But wow. You know, Ben, I don't know if you're going to get this back. That's Julie's. It's Julie's. You know what that tells me? I'm not messing with Julie. Don't mess with Julie. I may look stupid. I don't have to be stupid. Don't mess with Julie. Is she in the room? Or is she back with the kids, with the little ones? She's with the babies. Okay. So, Lisa Michelin, would you come get this after the service and return it to her? Okay, thank you. Now, what is the base of his confidence? He sees this 9-foot out there, 9-footer, this giant, and he thinks, been there, done that. His experience tells him, I know what to do. Verse 36. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. The uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. The second reason he's confident is he can't imagine how in this crisis here where the nation could get overrun that God would not step in and do something. It's inconceivable to him. And the third, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. And so we're just going to fast forward here to verse 40. Verse 40. So David goes to the field. He takes his staff in his hand, the shepherd's staff, 5 smooth stones from the stream, like one of these here, and puts them in the pouch of a shepherd's bag hanging around his shoulder, and with the sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, the shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David, walking across as David is walking out to meet him, with both armies on each side looking at this. If you'd been on the Philistine army, you would have think, oh my gosh, who have they sent out to fight Goliath? You would have been anticipating victory. And I can imagine all the Israelite army guys are going, whose idea was this to send that guy? Meanwhile, the Philistine and his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come out to me with sticks? The Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give you your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. What would you do if you were David? I love David's response. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and all the world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. What David can see is not just he's going to defeat Goliath and kill Goliath. What he can see is that the Philistine army that has been a menace to the people is going to be destroyed. God is going to deal with all of them. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line. I love that. Reaching into his bag, he took out a stone, begins going this thing, and then just across from probably no far away as I was from Emmett Harrison, that stone flies through the air, and it hits him right in the forehead. The writer says the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell down face on the ground. How'd you like to have been in the Philistine army to see that? Nobody on either side saw this coming. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. And when he stands over him, he sees, kind of like the bear and the lion, that it's a mortal wound, but he's not yet dead. And so he reaches down next to Goliath, and he picks up Goliath's sword, which in the story, in a few weeks we'll find out, was huge. And he pulls it out like this, and then he takes that sword, and he plunges it into Goliath. And all the people in the Philistine army are dumbfounded. And it says that David then cut off Saul's head with the sword, just to make sure nobody had any idea of some other different outcome here, and reaches down and picks it up. Now suddenly, all the men that were on this side of the army, who had been dismayed and terrified for 40 days, suddenly are courageous. And their response here, then the men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath. Remember where Goliath was from? And to the gates of Ekron, also a Philistine city. Their dead were strewn along the Shaaraim road to Gath and to Ekron. Now, as I think about this story, as I thought about the story this week, the things that strike me are that the situation looked dire from everybody on God's side. It looked dire. There's no way out of that, except for one fella. And for some reason, his confidence is based not on how it seems. He's not trusting how it looks. He is trusting something else. And because of that, he is confident. One of the stories that I like, and we'll close with this, is a story from up in the world of airplanes. There was a pastor that was flying across the Midwest. And if you've ever done this from the central part of the U.S. out this way, you know what happens when you get to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado? Hey, you know this, right? Oh, my God, it's going to be a bumpy ride. And we've done this a number of times, and just about every time it seems the worst is from Denver to Colorado Springs. That's the one that, has anybody else done that? It seems like you are just in a roller coaster. Well, the pastor's on the plane, and they've been going about 30 minutes or so, and it's time for the drink service, and the pilot gets on the phone, on the intercom, and says, folks, we're going to have some turbulence here, and so we're going to delay the drink service until things kind of smooth out. And so everybody kind of, oh, okay. Please put your seatbelt on and stay down, stay in your seat unless there's some other thing you need to do. Everybody sits there, the pastor's sitting there, and they start to hit some turbulence. And it's not bad turbulence, but you don't want to be standing up walking down the aisle with the way things are going, up and down and kind of pitching this way and pitching this way. And they go about 30 minutes this way, and it's not getting any better. And then the pilot comes back on the plane. He says, folks, we're going to be going into a storm, and there's really no way around the storm. And so we are going to postpone dinner service. We really want you to stay in your seats. Please do not get up. We are in for a very bumpy ride. And by this time, it was night. It was dark outside. And they sure hit that turbulence, up and down. And one of that kind of turbulence where sometimes it's like on a roller coaster at the very top, and you go over that first thing, and you're just kind of airborne, or so it seems. And the plane comes down, your stomach is up here, and finally catches and start to climb up, and now your stomach is moving somewhere else. Back and forth. And the pastor said he looked around during this time. It lasted for about 30 minutes or so. And he said the response of the people was so interesting. Nobody said a word. He said some of the people were looking straight ahead at the back seat in front of them. A lot of the people had their eyes closed. Some were looking, their face was up and their eyes closed. Some were looking down and their eyes were closed. Some were looking straight at the back seat in front of them and their eyes were closed. But there was just this terror just beneath the surface throughout the plane. Except for the girl on the other side of him, on the other side of the aisle, there was a girl in about second or third grade. And she just seemed as calm as could be. She had her feet tucked up under, sideways underneath. And she had a little bag with some books in it, and she was just reading her books. And no matter what the plane did, she would kind of go along with it and just kept reading her books. She was the only one that seemed calm during the entire flight. And so he was curious about this little girl. And so they finally landed, and it seemed like all the passengers could not wait to get off the plane, probably for, a number of different reasons, which we won't go into. But he wanted to talk to this little girl. She was in no hurry to get off the plane either. Everybody behind them left, and finally it was just him on this side of the aisle and her on this side of the aisle. And he said to her, I noticed that when we were going through all that turbulence, it seemed to me you were the only one that was calm in the entire plane. Were you not afraid? And she said, no. He said, well, why not? And she said, my daddy's the pilot, and he's taking me home. That is a metaphor for our life. Do not be discouraged or disheartened when you go through some kind of roller coaster and you're not sure what's going to happen with you. Because of the pilot we know. And he's in the process of shaping us and taking us home. Let's pray together. Father, we We thank you for this story for a number of reasons. But it does illustrate so often how life looks to us and how things seem. And yet, how things seem can be so wrong. Help us have eyes of faith. Help us to trust you, no matter what kind of turbulence that we happen to be in, and no matter how bad things look, that you are telling a story, and that you will see us through to the ending that you desire.